A few words about the sets of slides in this channel with background music and without verbal presentation. Some will think, what is that, an adult playing with PowerPoint slides? It's not so, and let me explain why. Our lives are heavily digitized, so is education. While learning online comes with immense advantages, such as fast and free access to the ocean of educational materials, the disadvantages are overwhelming. This includes misinformation, disinformation, fraud, higher prevalence of unreliable free access sources that swamp the limited access, peer-vetted, reliable publications. Another poor outcome is that we do not value knowledge obtained so easily with one click. A few decades ago, if one needed to review literature for a dissertation, for example, he had to buy books or articles from the bookstores or borrow from libraries or friends, scan, copy and return. Materials obtained in this way were valued because of the efforts involved. Now people earn degrees just by sourcing online. Yet the most tragic outcome of e-learning are the learning disabilities, which increase dramatically. Education is not my specialty, and I will leave the problem of learning disabilities to the specialists in the field with degrees in education, psychology, neurology, or speech therapy. What I believe is that most of the cases of learning disabilities have nothing to do with cognitive decline or limitations. It is about the lack of inspiration and connection with the subject of learning. The student is fully capable to absorb the knowledge, but he hates it. He lacks connection to it. It's like there is software available to download, but the driver for downloading it is missing. And without connection or inspiration, even the brightest student forgets the obtained knowledge soon after. Speaking of proper education, I recall my dad, Roland, who was a medical doctor, MD, and scientist, PhD. Not only he was the epitome of brilliant intellect and morality, he was also my academic advisor and my inspiration. He was raised by a single mother because his father was killed in the battlefields during World War II when he was just 7 years old. And during his studies in medical university, he was working after school hours to hold his widowed mother and siblings. Despite being overoccupied, he was an outstanding student. And this is what I have learned from his great book and former classmates, some of whom after turned to be my own professors in the same medical school. Indeed, with a 30-year interval, my dad and I graduated from the same medical school. My dad was a phenomenal but a very modest person who could not brag or sell, so I learned about his academic excellence from his friends and former classmates. One example, he had to take the anatomy exam in the first grade, the hardest ever subject in medical school, and the chair of the anatomy department was one of the toughest and most formidable professors. Then it was very common to fail the exam and retake it for some average passing grade. But not so with my father. Exhausted by his side job plus full-time school, he would conclude his day on a favorite bench in a public park with his books around him. On the eve of the anatomy exam, he sat on the same bench, turning the pages of the thick atlases and textbooks, and that one evening was enough to get an excellent grade the next morning. The anatomy chair, Manukyan, was still young when my father was his student. When I was a medical student in the same school, my father's anatomy professor was still working in his last pre-retirement year. So when I took the exam, he recalled my father by my surname. That's how he had been impressed by my father. Another example, I was preparing for medical school admission, and there were 4 exams to pass: chemistry, physics, biology, and language. I was very strong in chemistry and of course in biology, but I didn't like physics that much. Although I had excellent grades in physics in high school, I just didn't like it. Of course, my prominent parents had secured the best tutors in the city for the admission exams. But when the day of physics was approaching, I was nervous and I felt that tutor's job was useless. I remember I was studying detonator aneroid and electric generator, and I hated both. Noticing that, my father sat with me, going through the entire course of physics, chapter by chapter, picking the highlights, and that is when I built a connection and even love for physics. Like magic happened. My attitude for physics vertically changed. Next day I passed the admission exam. Of the maximum score 5, I scored 4, and 4 only because I had no time to fully respond to the last question. This brings us back to the driver concept. Software, which is the knowledge in this case, is not enough. You need to have a connection to the topic, which is the driver, to install the software, which is knowledge, into your brain folders. Here I involve music as the driver. I was also a musician specialized in fortepiano, as I also graduated from a school of music, so music is part of my DNA. Some may see music as distraction. I see it as a driver. The power of music is not an eye-opening discovery, of course. Music improves cognitive skills more than twice because it harmonizes and harmonizes the network between the frontal and prefrontal cortex, the temporal lobes and limbic system, including hippocampus, amygdala, that are in charge of episodic declarative memories that are indexed for later processing, as well as stimulate the vernix area, the auditory area in the left hemisphere. Thus, music simultaneously stimulates many areas of the limbic brain and cortex versus the limited and even stressful stimulation of cortex while learning without background music. To memorize, you need to have the experience linked to emotions, good or bad, or any other sensory stimuli, visual, tactile, or olfactory. Although I am a bit suspicious of the olfactory stimulus for maintaining long memory, as the cranial nerve 1, which is the olfactory nerve, is the only cranial nerve directly attached to the cerebrum without stopping at the thalamus. So, if a student faces learning disabilities because of the ocean of fast-tracked online materials, he needs a substitute for missing emotions, and that is music, a mixed modality that tangents with the sensory stimulation to the cognitive work. Now, if you notice in my videos, the frequency of slide transitions matches with the meters, cadences, and accents of the music. And if there are pieces with adagio, legato, fermato, or gradually changing dynamics, such as crescendo followed by diminuendo, I prolong the underlying slide so the music message will be complete before you move to the next slide. This matching, in my view, facilitates the learning process because of the harmonically mixed stimuli that link the cortex with the limbic system to secure better absorption and memorizing.